Well, welcome back. To start out the second half of the evening, Kevin Wittison is going to be singing Down by the Riverside. Please help me welcome Kevin Wittison.
Those of you who are Hearth veterans have heard my rap on this before, so pardon me, but for those of you who have not seen this before, you probably came this evening thinking, okay, you're going to leave your $5 at the door and you're going to come in and everybody out there is going to be entertained while those of us up here do the entertaining, but that's not going to work. The line between me and the rest of you is now gone, and you're all in the band. Anyway, those of you who know this song, jump in whenever you feel like it. Those of you who don't know the song already, by the time the second chorus rolls around, you'll know it well enough to join in, and please do. I'm gonna lay my sword and shield down by the riverside. Down by the riverside, down by the riverside, I'm gonna lay my sword and shield down by the riverside, study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more, I ain't gonna study war no more, I ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more, ain't gonna study war no more, I ain't gonna study war no more. I'm gonna walk with the Prince of Peace down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I'm gonna walk with the Prince of Peace down by the riverside, study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more, ain't gonna study war no more, ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more, ain't gonna study war no more, I ain't gonna study war no more. I'm gonna hold hands with the world down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I'm gonna hold hands with the world down by the riverside, study war no more. Everyone now.
Thank you again, Kevin. Our next storyteller is Tim Johnson. Tim has been an active Rotarian for 38 years, most recently as a member of Medford Rogue Rotary. He is neither a duck nor a beaver, rather he was graduated from both USC and UCLA. He is a native of Los Angeles, and in recent years he's been the lead for Rotary projects after the tsunami in India and Sri Lanka, and health projects in Kenya, Nicaragua, and most recently in Guatemala. He is here tonight with a story from Guatemala about restoring lives with clean water. Please help me welcome Tim Johnson talking about how to change the world for $50.
Thank you. I'd like to ask all of you first to close your eyes and imagine you're watching a scene on a dusty road in a remote village in Guatemala, and there's a little boy or girl walking home from school because they're sick with parasites in their stomach. So they don't feel good, they're missing school, they won't graduate, they won't get a job, and they won't have a life because they don't have a clean glass of water. Now, if you open your eyes and picture you're looking at a mom with tears of joy in her eyes because a bunch of Rotarians, men and women, have just installed a water filtration system in her very simple home, and her children can no longer be sick frequently and miss school and not graduate and not have a job, and instead will have a life, all for a water system that costs $50. Now, the clean water is one of the priorities of Rotary around the world, but a good project like this, and I'll describe the filtration system, any good project has to start with one person. And in this case, it was a Rotarian in Kansas City, Missouri named Jorge, who is from Guatemala, teaches history in high school in Kansas City. And both of his parents are Mayan, so he knows the territory very well. And on one of many trips to Guatemala, he and a cadre of volunteers asked the local people what they needed. He didn't go in and tell them what he could do for them. He asked them what they needed. And that's one of the keys of a good project. I learned that the hard way. I spent a month in Mississippi after Katrina, and I walked into a VFW post about 3 weeks after Katrina, and I said, "What do y'all need?" Thinking it'd be water, food, or medicine. They said, "We need denture adhesive. Our teeth are all coming out." And none of the relief centers have denture adhesive. So you always want to ask, not tell somebody what they need. The second element, besides asking people, is keep a project as simple as possible if you want it to succeed. The water filters that were developed by Jorge and his group are very simple. It's a 5-gallon white bucket at the top that you pour in the horrible water that's local. There's a little plastic tube that sends it through a filter, which costs $35, and then into another bucket to hold the clean water and a spigot at the bottom. The entire rig is $50. It takes no electricity and almost no maintenance. The families have to backflush it once a month. The other thing besides keeping it simple and asking them what they need is you have to have good partners. On this end of the world, on our water project, the partners are Rotarians from all over the U.S. And what happens is about, in our case, 8 of us from our club went down to Guatemala for 1 week, men and women, and we spent the first day drilling holes in these buckets and pre-assembling the water system and preparing to take them out to the villages the following 4 days. And in 5 days, those 8 Rotarians installed 100 water filters in 100 homes that changed the lives forever of every child in those 100 homes. But it doesn't just take partners on this end, it takes partners on the receiving end too. So in Guatemala, the volunteers that work with Jorge go out to the Mayan villages and talk to people about what their needs are. And for those people who want to have a clean water filter, they sign a contract where they agree to go to a class to learn how to maintain it. They agree to never sell the filter because it would be worth quite a bit to a village that has no clean water. They agree to let volunteers come in at least once a year and inspect to make sure everything is correct. Because if you have 2 5-gallon buckets full of water, that's over 80 pounds. It can't be on a rickety little table. It's plastic. It can't be next to the kitchen stove. There's several basics so that the families agree that we will become part of their household in checking things out. They have skin in the game, in other words. They might not have dollars in the game, but they have an investment of time and their honor to keep the thing up. So in Guatemala, we've had a success that all goes back to one person, keeping it simple, asking what they need, and having partners on both ends. It's a good example that every one of you in this room can do something that changes the world. But as Mother Teresa said, you change the world one person at a time. So everyone here, sometime in the next day or year or decade, can change somebody else's life. You don't have to be rich or famous. As I often say, you don't need gold at your fingertips, you just need gold in your heart. And that's what we try and do at Rotary. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. I thought I'd spend a few minutes, this is where Michelle was going to talk, and this is not my story, but it's one I hadn't thought about when I came in this evening, but it's a story of somebody else. It's a Rotarian. And the Rotarian's name is Herbert J. Taylor. Herbert J. Taylor was the only thing he and I had, well, we're both Rotarians, but anyway, he graduated from Sioux High School in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, many, many years before I did. And he bought this aluminum company called Club Aluminum in the height of the Depression. This company was worth absolutely nothing. As a matter of fact, it was mired in debt and losing money. And everybody was, he'd say, why did you do this? Why did you buy this company? And he says, well, it would be to provide jobs. And he really made this company very, very successful. And one of the things, as I read his book, he talked about is he would never allow the words, for example, best. He would never talk to his salespeople and he would say, we don't have the best product. And so he wrote these 32 words. And the 32 words are called the Rotarians 4-Way Test. And this is a card that I can talk about because I carry it in my billfold. It's also an employee handbook for the dealership because it's something I really, really believe in. And it's the 4-way test of the things we think, say, or do. So pretty much everything that includes in life. And the first question that he asked is it the truth? And if it's not the truth, you don't need to go on to the next 4 questions. It's the end of the story right there. If it's a lie, you don't do any more. If it is the truth, you ask a second question. Is it fair to all concerned? Then it gets a little bit tougher, when that one there, because it's hard to decide, is it fair to all concerned? And it really makes you look in your heart to know, is it fair to all concerned? The third part, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And the last question, will it be beneficial to all concerned? So there's 32 words there. And to me, you'll see it at club banners for Rotary, and it's such an important part of life. But he went on in 1936, I believe, to become the president of Rotary International. And then when he died, he actually was up in Drummond Island, Michigan, which is a place, an island up there, not very populated, and he set up a camp for kids that were wayward kids, and to kind of find a way, and he changed a lot of lives. But in business, I thought those 32 words were so powerful. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships and be beneficial to all concerned? And I was thinking, in whether it's talking about politics, business, our families, the Rotary 4-Way Test is something that you really have a hard time arguing with as far as what's good for our country and for us individually. Our last teller of the evening, Margaret Bradford. Margaret retired in 2014 after working 24 years at Rogue Community College, first as a public information assistant and later as a director of marketing and recruitment. Prior to her career at RCC, She worked as a reporter and editor for the Grants Pass Daily Courier and served 6 years on the Grants Pass City Council. A graduate of the University of Oregon with a master's degree in journalism and communication, she is a member of Road Gateway Rotary, the Four-Way Community Foundation Board, and the Grants Pass Sister City Committee. Her personal interests include travel, whitewater rafting, walking, and reading. Margaret's story is Ending Polio in My Lifetime. Please help me welcome Margaret Bradford.
Okay, without notes. My story begins in 1952, the year I was born. It was also the worst polio epidemic this country has ever experienced. Out of 58,000 reported cases that year, 3,000 people died and 21,000 people were paralyzed to some degree. Polio was a parent's worst nightmare. The disease killed or crippled previously active and healthy children. There was no cure, and at that time, they didn't even know the cause, which made it even more terrifying. 3 years after that outbreak, Dr. Jonas Salk became a national hero when he developed the first safe and effective polio vaccine with the help of the March of Dimes. That was also the year that my family moved from Dallas, Texas to Bordeaux, France, where my father, who was a captain in the Army, was stationed. We had, before we left, my siblings and I were vaccinated for smallpox, diphtheria, measles, mumps, rubella, tetanus, everything but polio. But by the time we came back to the United States a couple of years later, almost every child in the US had been vaccinated, and polio was on the run. And yet, in second grade, I remember a boy being wheeled into my class on a gurney. And he was face down on this gurney. He was paralyzed from the neck down. And they would take that gurney and lower it to the floor till it was just inches from the floor. And then they'd put a book on the floor and let him read, so he could read along with the rest of the class. By 1962, when I was 10 years old, polio, there still was no cure for polio, but there were very few new cases because the vaccine had eliminated that in this country. And in 1979, the year I moved to Oregon, polio had been eliminated from the United States, and Rotary International made worldwide, global polio eradication its goal. Even so, 11 years later, when my infant daughter went for her first polio vaccine, there were still some 350,000 cases of polio in the world every year. Well, that was the year that Rotary decided to join forces with the UNICEF and the World Health Organization and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control to start the Global Polio Eradication Initiative. And since that time, the initiative has vaccinated over 2.5 billion children in the world against polio. For just 60 cents or less, a child can be immunized from this crippling disease for life. In 2010, I was able to serve as president of my Rotary Club, And it was also the year that I was able to help in this worldwide effort to eliminate polio from the face of the earth. I joined a group of Rotarians from Canada and the United States in a National Immunization Days effort in Ethiopia. NID, or National Immunization Day, or NID, is a massive campaign to vaccinate all the children under the age of 5 at one time, in 1 week. So I joined this group. And by the way, before I went to Ethiopia, I got my first polio vaccine. I had never gotten one. So I joined our leaders, who were Seattle Rotarians, Ezra Tashome and Ben Abe. And Ezra was born in Ethiopia, and Ben was originally from Uganda. And they had been leading NIDs to East Africa for over 15 years at that time, and they still do. My group flew to Addis Ababa, which is the capital of Ethiopia, and there we met the Ethiopian National Polio Committee Chair. Excuse me. I'm really nervous. And from there, we started a whirlwind week of activities, starting with introductions and a list of do's and don'ts. Don't give money to beggars. Do watch out for pickpockets. Don't drink the water. Do wash your hands. Don't take pictures of any government buildings. So we were a little overwhelmed, but we were eager to get underway, and we loaded onto a bus and headed off to a Rotary-supported polio rehabilitation clinic out in the country, just outside of the city. On our trip through the city, we were in a bus. We really saw a lot of interesting things, including high-rise hotels right next to hovels. Big, broad, well-paved streets intersected by dirt roads. In a city of 3 million people, which is just a little bit under the size of LA, there was one signal light in the entire city, which made the intersections an invitation for mayhem and gridlock. Our bus played chicken with taxis and SUVs. Donkeys were trotting right down the street with big loads of eucalyptus leaves on their backs. Homeless people were lying on the meridian between the lanes of traffic. They'd set up camp. There was trash everywhere, and there were no sidewalks. People on foot there were just rivers of people walking down the street, and hundreds of other people sitting idly under any shade they could find. It was a very interesting city. By the time we moved out of the city into the countryside, we started noticing a lot of little farms, a lot of little mud and straw houses, and occasionally we'd see a farmer out in the field with his oxen and his wooden plow tilling the fields. Sometimes in front of a farmer's house, we'd see a styrofoam cup sitting on a fence post, and that was a signal, we'd learned, that the homemade beer that farmer was brewing was for sale. They didn't let us stop and get any of it, though. When we reached the rehabilitation center, we were met by 2 little children with their arms full of flowers and their legs in metal braces. The center serves polio victims, but also children with spinal disease and spinal cord injuries, including those who have been the victims of landmines. The children, who are mostly from farms and rural villages, get hydrotherapy. Some of them get surgery to repair the damage to their legs. They learn to walk instead of crawl. And they get braces and corrective shoes. Those who are missing a limb receive prosthetics. Children who will never walk again are given hand-operated tricycles. And all these devices were made at the center. And also that year, the Rotarians that I was traveling with had brought along, as a donation, 12 shiny new child-sized wheelchairs for a donation to the center. The day before we actually started doing immunization, the Rotarians that I was traveling with and the local Rotarians who were hosting us were invited to the National Palace for a meeting with the President of Ethiopia and a End Polio Now celebration. And part of that ceremony, we gave the President of Ethiopia a soccer ball that everyone had signed, and it was a metaphor for our effort to kick polio out of Ethiopia. So our effort was part of a larger campaign that was 80,000 children we were going to try to immunize. Not the 45 of us, but there were other groups in Ethiopia too. We were going to try to immunize 80,000 children in just 1 week. So the morning of the actual immunization days, we got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, had breakfast, and then separated into 6 different groups. We were going to go out to villages, clinics, schools, in an effort to immunize a lot of children at one time rather than going house to house as they often do in India and other countries. So my group loaded up in a SUV, a couple of SUVs, and headed out the one highway to, from Addis Ababa to a little town called, my brain just went dead, Waliso, about 2 hours south of Addis Ababa. And our first assignment, when we got there, was a women and children's health clinic, and there were about 300 kids all lined up waiting for us when we got there. And there was a band playing in an effort to entice more people to come and bring their children. So it was kind of a carnival atmosphere. And the World Health Organization had already set up the immunization station, so all we had to do, the volunteers, was give the immunization. Well, oral polio vaccine doesn't require a syringe, and it doesn't require a needle, so volunteers like myself can become vaccinators with very little training. So as these kids came through, they were infants to up to age 5. They'd get vitamin A drops. They would get worm medicine, and then we would give them a couple of drops of polio in their mouth. And I would say to the children, Abba, Abba, which means open. And they'd open their mouths like little birds, and we'd drop in those drops. And then we'd take their pinkies and put purple indelible ink on it so that we could keep track of who was vaccinated. Some of the kids also got measles shots, and when the needles came out for the measles shots, the kids really started howling. So that night we spent the night in a little motel in Waliso, and the next morning we went out to a school and again vaccinated children outdoors in the shade of the hotel. The school. Almost everything's done outside because it's so hot. And from there, we went to our last assignment, which was a small village a few miles outside of town. We took our SUVs and drove down a red dirt road for about a mile. And then when the road got so rough we couldn't drive any further, we parked the cars, we got out, and we walked another mile. And pretty soon we were coming to these little huts and these little gardens, but there weren't any people around, and there were some chickens and some goats, but no people. So we just kept walking down the road, and eventually we came to a a grove of really big trees, and there sat the entire village in the shade of these trees waiting for us. And again, the health workers had already gotten there and set up the immunization systems. So all we had to do was get our little jackets on and start giving these precious drops of polio vaccine to the kids. I had brought stickers with me, and when the kids got through getting their vaccinations, I started passing out stickers. And pretty soon I was surrounded by dozens of little kids, big smiles on their faces, runny noses. You know, they were just little guys. And they all wanted to interact with the Ferengi, or foreigner. That's what they called us. And so I was noticing that most of the kids had their heads shaved, boys and girls alike, which is probably an advantage in a hot, dusty climate where there's no plumbing. But I also noticed that the infants had a little top knot on their head. I thought that was kind of cute, so I asked somebody about it, and the answer, the explanation was really moving to me. Because there's very little sanitation, and there's a lot of disease and poverty in Ethiopia, many children never live to see their second birthday. And the purpose of the top knot is so that God can reach down and take them easily to heaven. So that explanation made me think about why I was there and why I was there with other Rotarians. And we were there to help save children's lives. And every year we get closer to wiping this terrible disease off the face of the earth. In 2017, there were only 17 cases left in 2 countries, and that was Afghanistan and Pakistan. So today, in my lifetime, we are just this close to ending polio. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margaret.